Welcome to Sounds of Brass.
All in a Day's Work, 30 Years as a Local Bobby, by Chris Helme.
Chapter 4. Even the rats were scared. My visits back home to Stony Lane were becoming more frequent as my digs were so bad. It was while I was on these home visits that I was often asked if I had been involved in anything dangerous, or if I'd been put in any scary situations. Well, I couldn't say yes. I had to say no, otherwise Mum, Dad and Gran wouldn't sleep at night. Having worked Quarry Hill for a few weeks, both the inspector and sergeant seemed to trust me a bit more, and I was put out to work on 3 Beat. This beat basically covered the Calls, Call Lane, New York Street, the Corn Exchange, Crown Street, numerous alleyways and yards, and the Kirkgate areas, and the River Aire being the beat's natural boundary. The first night I worked on my new patch, the parade inspector told us about an escaped prisoner from a north of England jail who was heading back to Leeds to get the first policeman he saw. Everyone was on a state of high alert. This was the first time I'd felt a sense of apprehension in the parade room. Arthur, my old friend who showed me round Quarry Hill, reminded me not to do anything heroic or to take chances. Any problems, he told me, and scream for help over the radio, and every man and his dog will be with you in minutes. This new beat area was fairly run down, with quite a few of the shops and businesses boarded up. Despite that, I always enjoyed walking through the streets, alleyways, arcades and yards behind the shops. I'm sure you could almost get from one end of the city centre to the other through these alleys and backyards, without having to walk on the main roads. Over 40 years later, what was then an old run-down area has now been transformed into a swish, modern part of the city. For the occupiers of the expensive apartments, it is now the in-place to live. Arthur had told me that walking the beat involved having to check all the door handles of the shops and businesses to ensure they were all locked and secure. To get to know this beat even better, I also checked the back doors and the alleyways, making sure there were no broken windows or flickering torchlights from unwelcome rooftop visitors. I occasionally did find doors and windows left open, and it was surprising when, after I'd called the control room to contact a key holder to come out and deal with it, in some cases the key holder couldn't be bothered. We obviously couldn't leave the property insecure, and unless the key holder did turn up, an officer had to guard the shop until they did. One key holder, who refused to turn out to a very posh menswear shop in the Bond Street area, got his comeuppance for his repeated refusal. An insecure door had been found at about 4:30 a.m. The key holder was duly contacted, but he was apparently in bed and just too tired to be bothered. All the shops had alarms, of course, and some of the very posh shops had alarm studs attached at street level to the inside of the large front windows, in the event of a smash-and-grab attack. When the alarm at this particular shop activated through what turned out to be a false alarm, the key holder again refused to turn out. This was Tuesday night, but then the alarm went off on Wednesday at 5:30 a.m, and then again on Thursday, Friday and Saturday, exactly the same time each day. By Sunday, the key holder had finally got the message. When the alarm goes off and the police ask you to attend, it is expected that you will. From that day on, the key holder never failed to attend a call-out. I did wonder how the alarm managed to go off at 5:30 a.m. 5 days in succession. There was a rumour circulating that one of the all-night officers gently tapped on the shop window, just where the alarm stud was, as the tap was just enough to activate the alarm. Owing to the time the alarm was activated, and by the time the key holder was contacted by the alarm company, it was one of the early turnstaff from Millgarth who had to attend at the premises. The officer never let on who activated the alarm, being aware of the trouble the key holder had caused, and it remained a mystery to both the key holder and the shop management. The night we were warned about the escaped prisoner, I was patrolling my new beat in the dark and dismal surroundings of the cobble streets at the back of the Corn Exchange. With very little street lighting, I have to admit that it was a bit scary. Now, how did Arthur say you had to walk on patrol? Heel to toe, planting the heel of your foot firmly on the ground before rolling the rest of your foot down. That way you don't walk flat-footed. It stopped the sole of your boot slapping on the ground and being heard in the next street. Why is this important? I asked Arthur. He explained, you hear them before they hear you. Heel to toe. I soon got the hang of it. While I was a bit scared, I felt that I had the psychological upper hand over the potential wrongdoer, because in those days I, like many other officers, believed that my uniform represented all the protection I needed. OK, this was perhaps a bit naive, but it was almost 45 years ago, when times were different. Something else I discovered patrolling in the dark was that after all those years of my mother telling me to eat carrots because they would help you see in the dark, it was actually true. While I was patrolling in the back of the Corn Exchange, I had my issue black rubber torch blazing out ahead of me. But as soon as I turned it off, I found that I was temporarily blinded and couldn't see a thing. After a few minutes, my sight returned almost back to normal. I decided to leave the torch off, and my eyes soon adjusted to the dark. After all those years, I was beginning to think Mum was right. She wasn't, of course. It was just a myth that actually dated back to the Second World War, when the RAF said that it was their diet of carrots that enabled them to see the Nazi bombers at night, rather than their new radar technology. This was a red herring, of course, but it was based on fact. Whilst carrots may not give you night vision, just a serving of cooked carrots contains more than the recommended daily intake of vitamin A, which, as all mothers knew, is essential for sustaining healthy eyesight. Making my way behind the Corn Exchange, I could almost see the rats scurrying in the gutters. A dustbin lid hit the ground as rats the size of footballs disappeared into the night. Suddenly I saw a small but faint light ahead of me. I could see it was behind a door, and it flickered as the door closed in the night breeze, blocking out the bright light before it opened again and the light reappeared. Bloody hell, I thought, it's that escaped prisoner, hiding. But what could I do? By now my heart was racing 10 to the dozen as I clutched my rubber torch in one hand and my blue radio transmitter in the other. Was it time to scream for help? I edged nearer the door, ready to club whoever it was with the rubber torch. I then realised whoever was behind the door couldn't see me either, and they were really probably just as scared as I was. With all guns blazing, well, at least the rubber torch, I kicked the door open. "Stand still and don't move," I shouted. The door swung back on me and I ran through it. Suddenly I was on the ground, and something had jumped on me from behind. I struggled, but it was heavy, rolling on the floor, trying to wrestle free from the heavy weight on my back. I could see my face was wet from the muddy puddles on the ground. I managed to break free and struggle to my feet. No one spoke, nobody moved, and there was an uncomfortable silence. With my torch now lighted up the whole area, I could see that no one was there. There was no sound of anyone running away. I could see the twinkling of rats' eyes as they scurried away, probably just as frightened as I was for those few minutes. I found myself in the backyard of a second-hand furniture shop with a number of settees standing on end. I noticed that a few of them had armchairs stacked on top of them, and I realised that as I'd burst through the door, it had bounced against one of the settees. On the other side, in total darkness, an armchair had come crashing down onto me and had knocked me to the ground, because it was so heavy. What a prat I felt. I was glad that I had not asked for all the troops to turn out. I retraced my steps back through Crown Street, passing Crown Court, and into the light of the calls. I looked down at my uniform and saw I was covered head to toe in mud. What a mess. What would I tell the sergeant? Or worse, what if the inspector decided to come and see me for a chalk in the next few minutes? I had two choices: make my way back to Millgarth and have my meal break there, having to explain my appearance to the sergeant, the inspector, and everyone else, or I could go to Brotherton House for my meal break. It was more than likely that the sergeant would be back at Millgarth, showing everyone just how good he was at dominoes. Brotherton House it is. I went through the dark passageways, yards and ginnels that all ran parallel to the main streets. No chance of bumping into the sergeant or inspector in here. I then saw another light in the distance. Not again, I thought. Thankfully, as I got nearer, there was a man standing in a partially lit doorway, smoking. Judging from the smell of stale fags and beer in the air, this was obviously the back door of a pub. We acknowledged each other. From his appearance, he was a barman, or a waiter. I was probably about 3 or 4 yards from him when he shouted, "Are you coming in for a warm?" "No, thanks," I replied. "I'm in a hurry." But hang on a minute, I thought this could give me a chance to dry out and get cleaned up a bit. "Yeah, OK," I said, "thanks." It was the back room of a pub, with 5 or 6 people inside. Some were sat at tables, and the rest were standing up at the bar, drinking. One man at the bar was wearing a badly creased suit. While he was not drunk, he had obviously been drinking. He looked at me. "What you having, officer?" "Oh, a glass of lemonade is fine, thanks." "Waiter, give my young friend a pint of your very best beer." "I don't drink beer," I said. As the barman pulled the pint, the man said, "Where you from?" "Halifax." "No, where are you working?" "Millgarth." "How long have you been in the job?" "Quite a while now," I replied. "Can I ask who you are?" "I'm Detective Inspector." As his voice trailed off, the detective inspector part was enough for me to think I had to get out of there now. "Sorry, sir, but I have to go now." "Well, have your drink before you go." I had not touched a glass of beer since I was 17, when it had made me sick, but I drank 3/4 of this one in one go and quickly left. As soon as I had walked back into the alley and felt the night air, my head began to spin, slowly at first, but gradually getting faster. Then I felt sick, probably due to drinking it so fast. There was the inevitable consequence. At least no one saw me being sick. I managed to make my way across the city centre, going through as many alleys and backyards as I could. There was no one in the front office when I arrived at Brotherton House, so I went straight to the gents to get cleaned up. After that and my meal break, it was back to 3-beat, only this time I decided to walk down the hedgerow rather than the back alleys. My radio went off. 862 location. Oh no, now I'm in for it. 862 to control, the hedgerow, junction with Park Row. Stand by. 862 from the inspector. Are you OK? And no problems? No problems, sir, and I'm OK. I couldn't think what that was about. The inspector had never put that message out before. After about 2 a.m., particularly early in the week, the radio traffic tended to be a bit quiet. After receiving that strange call from the inspector, it became clear he was asking all the night staff the same question. "Inspector to all city centre beat officers, I'm coming round to see you all, beat by beat. Stand by at your present locations." There was obviously something wrong. I had not heard this kind of message before. The inspector came, saw me, and quickly drove off again, with no time even for a chalk or an explanation. Before setting off back to 3 Beat, I met up with Big Dave, who covered the Bond Street area. Park Row was the boundary of his beat. He started to explain the reason for the inspector's panic visits. Apparently, a civvy walking through the city centre had reported hearing what he thought was a police whistle in the city centre. We still had that issue whistle and chain back in those days. Not long afterwards, some of the night street cleaners had also reported hearing it. With the escaped prisoner still on the loose, everyone was understandably a bit edgy. Had the prisoner got the policeman, as he had threatened to when he escaped, and then stole his radio? Reports of the police whistle kept coming in. By now, all-night taxi drivers were starting to ring in. Inspector to all beat officers, be advised that all personnel have been accounted for. Try and establish where this whistling is coming from. I was still at the Headrow Junction when Big Dave crossed over Park Row and set off, walking back towards City Square. He'd only been gone a few seconds when I heard the whistling sound. I looked around and the streets were deserted. There was not a sound other than a whistling, and even Big Dave was out of sight by now. I walked up and down the Headrow and across into Cookridge Street, but I saw nothing, and by now the whistling had stopped. I was baffled. Walking back across to Park Row, out of habit, I pressed the pedestrian crossing button to make my way back down the Headrow. Suddenly, I heard it again, with not a soul in sight. No cars, no buses, and not even a taxi. I was now becoming more frustrated than puzzled. Then the penny dropped. It was the pedestrian crossing. I watched the crossing light change when the green man appeared. There was a high-pitched whistling sound coming from the signal. When the green man changed to red, the whistling stopped. This kind of crossing only became available in the late 1960s, and they were still new in most towns and cities. During the day, with the hustle and bustle of everyday city centre living, the sound would be lost amongst the myriad of street sounds. For the partially sighted or blind person, however, it was of paramount importance to their safety and daily lives to know when it was safe to cross the road. The problem was that at night, when all the street sounds had stopped, everybody could hear the whistling sound at all the crossings throughout the city centre. I took great delight in telling the inspector what the mystery sound was. Before he went off, he told us all that the escaped prisoner had been arrested in Liverpool.